And welcome back to the Cyber Leaders Exchange as we continue our Navy conversation on Zero Trust with Commander Nick Goddard, the Director of Operations for Navy Cyber Defense Operations Command, Barry Tanner, the Acting Executive Director and Command Operations Officer in the Navy Program Executive Office for Digital and Enterprise Services, and David Volker, the Department of the Navy CIO's lead for Zero Trust. And Mr. Volker, let's start with you again as we pick up this segment. I want to go back to some of what Mr. Tanner was saying in the last segment about workforce and culture. The cyber defense operations community is very big. It's used to doing things a certain way. There's a lot new in Zero Trust. Get us started by talking a bit about how much needs to be done, what is being done in terms of reskilling, upskilling, getting that culture change going and getting everybody into a Zero Trust mindset.
Yes, so in the Zero Trust Portfolio Management Office at the DoD level, we've set up sub-working groups for training and education that's led by the Defense Acquisition University. As part of that effort, we have a practitioner's course, we have a Zero Trust Awareness course. The awareness course is a CBT that can be completed in about an hour to allow folks that may have not heard about Zero Trust before or may have heard about it, in passing in a meeting, can take that in about an hour, get up to speed on all the regulatory requirements, the executive orders that have been placed to implement Zero Trust within DoD. But within the educational working group, we're identifying the types of training that we need, not just for our professional level DoD civilians and warfighters that are on the front line today, but also the C school and A school training that's going to be required, and reaching out to those educators and those instructors and have them participate within this working group to identify the types of training that we do need. Within the Department of Army, they do have a pretty robust educational course that is hands-on, that's shared within that environment. And what I would like to do is have those instructors from our C schools and A schools come in and see that type of training and adopt that within the Department of Navy for the benefit for those warfighters that are coming in new as an enlisted member to get that training. So when they hit that first 72 hours of on the job, they can understand what's required and be able to adapt to the new tools that are being provided within the Department of Navy for them to use to defend our technical baselines.
And at that, sort of joint DAU level of training, I guess that gets to the question of, is there a Navy and an Army and an Air Force way of doing Zero Trust, and are there different tools that people need to know about? What's broadly applicable that works across the entire department in terms of training?
So what we found that works best within the DAU for the practitioner's course is to tailor it to that particular service. So if we have a Marine Corps service and they're using a particular set of tools, the workup for that class, even though the curriculum is the same, we want to tailor it to that particular audience. The same is true for Navy, Air Force, Space Force, and also for Army. Noting that Army has implemented a handful of Zero Trust capabilities in their technical environment and shown a lot of success with their blue teaming reviews of that particular technical baseline, purple teaming, and then on the red team events, they're able to show the benefits and how well they can defend a technical baseline with just a handful, to show the benefits of not only the training, but also the implementation at other technical baselines outside of cloud.
I want to jump in on that. So one of the challenges we run into on the Navy side from an enlisted workforce and an officer workforce is we have traditional A and C schools and then initial officer accession within the community about foundational knowledge. And when we talk about cyber defense, and we talk about the ecosystem within Zero Trust, what does that look like? Industry is already employing these best practices. These tools roll out sometimes every other week. And so what does that look like? So our system cannot move fast enough. And I think we talk about foundational training. So how do we, one, reimagine what foundational training is? But with Zero Trust and some of the cloud services that we've been able to onboard today, it allows me to take a junior analyst or a junior operator that just showed up to the command, and within 30 to 60 days, get them, really functional from an upskilling standpoint. One, you understand foundational network topology, but you're able to use the tools much more effectively. And so some of the analogies I use, from a training standpoint, You can be functional with the tool, but can you really maximize your opportunity with that tool, right? So we talk about, I use the race car analogy. We want to build race car drivers. We want folks to take those tools, but from the foundation of zero trust and actually maximize all the things that are available. So when you give them a full capability standpoint from an internal perspective, they're able to move very quickly. And so the training that's whether it's online, in person, right? There's a plethora of opportunities for us to do that. And industry is already doing this. And so we're adopting those best practices using zero trust as the framework and allowing those tools to drive us to new outcomes that we didn't previously think was possible based on how fast that training can be delivered to us, whether it's online, in person, or other. But again, we don't have to send somebody back to Pensacola where our A&C schools sit within our community. They can do that right there live on the command. And one, it reduces the cost to the Navy, not just from a manpower perspective, but also from a fiscal standpoint. And so it allows us to actually be much more effective based on the tools that are being provided very quickly within the Zero Trust framework.
Getting back to the foundational knowledge, the foundational training piece of this, how durable do we think that's going to be once we start training people on a zero trust mindset? If somebody rotates out of a cyber defense field for 3 years and then comes back in, is what they learned in that foundational training still going to be applicable, or are they starting from zero?
So I wouldn't say they're starting from zero, but based on the pace of technology within industry and any new emerging technologies we intend to implement on the technical baseline, some additional training will be required to refresh those skills. But as we move warfighters from one duty station to the next, the solutions should be consistent enough that the skill sets they had in their previous command or coming out of C school and A school are effective enough so when they hit that first duty station in the first 3 days, they're able to adapt and start using tools right away, and in conjunction with any on-the-job training that may be specific for that particular environment.
From the standpoint of getting into sort of the life cycle discussion, right? As things evolve rapidly in the technical environment, right? Traditional acquisition approaches are thinking 3 to 5 year timelines, and in our world, it's 12 to 18 months, right? So we have to build that into how we're thinking about deploying the new capabilities as we go forward. I mentioned earlier in the discussion about the tight linkage between the operational community and us on the acquisition side. This is one element where it's critical as we're proposing or starting to implement iteratively new capabilities in the environment. And I emphasize iteratively for a reason. The change that we're seeing now isn't this big bang change, right? It's iterative. You'll see a new capability show up that is highly effective, but it's only one part of the larger whole. And so understanding what that's going to do, how that changes the approach, from not just from a buttonology, what button do I push and what thing do I think, but tactics and procedures, right? Tools, techniques, procedures, TTPs, all that stuff. Pulling that left, and we have our operators embedded in our actual delivery teams in order to identify those things early. And so when we do that, that allows Nick or his counterparts on the operational side of things at NavNet WorkCom to understand what's coming their way before it hits them, and start to think about, do I need to inject this into my current training program? Do I need to identify a new source to get, that sort of thing? And then from our perspective, if it is, I need in person, I need to provide that to them so that they're enabled for this new thing. We can get on it early, and well before it's deployed into production, we know exactly what is necessary for our operators to be able to have the skills they need. So people love to use the word agile, and we talk about it all the time. This is where it's happening in practice. By having the operators and the developers and the acquisition professionals all in the same room, essentially, virtual room, and talking about these things on a very regular basis, that allows us to get ahead of this a little bit and account for the speed of change. If you look at the Navy writ large over the last few years, the emphasis on the concept of ready, relevant learning, this is kind of that in practice. Fundamentals in the schoolhouse and practical application when you hit the job. And so the folks down in Suffolk at NavNet WorkCom and NCDOC have done a great job of building that kind of training into their command and their approach. of understanding their procedures and their tactics, and how that gets enhanced and modified along the way based on the new tools that are coming into the environment. And it's gone from hey, we'll look at this every few years to we look at this every month, every quarter, all the time. We're like, okay, what's new? What's different? It may not be huge, but it's definitely something we need to understand, account for, and implement in the environment so that we can continue to evolve.
One last thing I want to touch on the workforce side before we change subjects here is, I think we've established here that the knowledge requirements are different in a zero trust environment. What about total size of the manpower requirement? Is it any different at all? I know everybody's always going to say we don't have enough people, but does that change at all in a zero trust framework?
In general, the manpower requirement in aggregate, given the amount of automation in the environment, should go down. And we've seen tangible results that show us that. The teams at Navnet WorkCom and NCDoc that are performing tasks in this new environment with these new tool sets are much smaller than teams that had performed similar functions in the past. However, that's all predicated on sunsetting legacy, right? If you have both the new stuff and the old stuff all running together, you're not going to see any manpower reductions because the old stuff's still there. So you have to have an effective transition from your legacy environment into the new one to take advantage of that automation and those opportunities. So it's in classic terms, you'll see the curve go up before it all goes down, right? You'll see more people as you're going through the transition and implementing things. And then once you're able to start sunsetting those legacy capabilities, that's when the manpower advantage starts to show up really clearly. I'll say from our perspective in the Navy, we're still on that curve. We're still have some legacy things that are out there. The former Down CIO, Mr. Aaron Weiss, used to say, we've got 1 foot on the dock and 1 foot in the boat, and we're kind of balancing ourselves right now, hopefully to get on that boat and get underway here very soon. But it's definitely a challenge to make sure we've accounted for all the functionality in our legacy environment so we can truly sunset those things and move on. We hope to do so very soon.
And one of the outcomes I think that will help us get to that reduction in workforce, or the required workforce to operate these tools, is moving to a concept of partnership with that technology between the human operator and the technology that's being employed. So when an operator needs to be aware of a certain anomaly within the technical baseline, that those anomalies are brought to their attention quite readily so they can take action on those, noting that there's no way for a single human or even an army of humans to detect every piece of informational data that's out there that could be a possible threat. But industry has a term known as threat hunting. And by using some of these technologies from industry to help us do that threat hunting in real time, and then also in the logs, these things can help a fewer set of operators detect a greater amount of threat within the network and to take action in a timely manner.
As we start to wind down here, I want to make sure we touch a bit on how Zero Trust impacts everything else the Navy needs to do and is doing for IT modernization. As you do the architecting of new systems, as you modernize old systems, what does Zero Trust change about that?
I'll take that just as a kickoff. So from a standpoint of on the Navy side of the house, from a defender standpoint, right? So one of the things you'll try to draw corollary to is a lot of folks in the within the Navy and within the DoD associate Zero Trust and cloud. And so for us, those are two separate concepts, right? You can take Zero Trust and implement it in the cloud much more effectively than some of our legacy technologies, but cloud doesn't work everywhere. Zero Trust does as a framework. And so when we push that is kind of what we're looking for, because we do have last mile technical challenges, but the different implementations for Zero Trust will provide solutions to some of those legacy systems that because we'll be in a hybrid environment for quite some time as we roll these things together. So it's not just one tool that's applied to various use cases. It's reimagining what the use case is and saying Zero Trust, I'm not going to bolt it on at the end. It's part of the understanding about how we move forward with the networks. Both, when we talk about the last mile from a float is fundamentally different than an enterprise network. And so zero trust implementation is very critical for us to understand not just, hey, apply a tool to a problem. It's what does your ecosystem look like and how do we reimagine it? So we have more organizations asking, how do we do this more effectively at the beginning? And so the paradigm shift there is we're getting more organizations asking as they're building a network device, how do we do security and defense afterwards with zero trust after it's implemented? And so that's just a fundamentally different problem. And so now we're getting further ahead of the planning, design, and implementation from a defensive standpoint than we ever have in the past.
I think when it comes to the overall IT modernization, there is a strategic nature to this, and it has to drive all the way down into the tactical implementation. The DON-CIO office just recently released the strategic intent memo for Zero Trust that sets the direction for the department on here's what you need to be thinking about and how you need to be thinking about doing this. As mentioned before, it's a lot of there's tools involved, but there's policies, there's procedures, and there's design elements that all have to be pulled into that. When you look at what that strategic intent memo tells you, it says, all right, the parts of the enterprise that are fundamental to Zero Trust, those things that provide us the data that we make the decisions about, right? Zero Trust is really about making decisions about who can do what and when they can do it, from where, from what thing, all those kinds of rule sets. And you have to have good information, trusted and authoritative information to make those decisions right. So modernizing the systems that tell us who you are, that tell us what you're allowed to do, that tell us, what device you're coming from, that tells us what location you're coming from, right? We need to make sure all of those systems are fully modernized and can provide the telemetry necessary for the rest of our architecture to be effective. On the same time, as Nick mentioned, we need to be looking at Zero Trust from the beginning. It's a fundamental paradigm shift in terms of going from a boundary approach to a data where the boundary collapses to the data itself. So as our systems designers are looking at things, some of the assumptions they used to make about how you do this are different. So they need to understand that. And the stint memo talks to the specific principles that are now going to have to be part of that those design efforts. That's being promulgated through the systems commands. Everybody's thinking about that now and understanding how it impacts their plans. And it's every kind of technology. It's not just enterprise IT, right? This is a fundamental approach across the whole spectrum, and that's why DON-CIO released the memo, made sure that all of our technical community understands what they need to be doing, and are thinking about that and incorporating it into their modernization plans. So it's a major shift. The value we see right now on the Navy side is we can point a lot of those folks to an example. We can say, this is what it looks like when you're doing this the right way. This is what you need to be able to do. These are the outcomes you should be driving towards. Recent testing that we performed in partnership with the DoD CIO to say, all right, this is what Zero Trust means, right? Here are all these attributes about what Zero Trust means, everything from the operational processes all the way through the tools to the functions to all this stuff. And we went through an exercise to say, all right, does that really get you the outcome that you want? And we were successful at that. So the fact that we can now point our modernization community to an example and say, here's how you get there, is super helpful. And it lets them incorporate a different mechanism for how they pull their plans together and start tracking their progress towards, quote unquote, Zero Trust in a more well-defined manner.
Last question before we run out of time. I don't want to take us too far down an RMF rabbit hole, but it strikes me that is potentially important here. Risk management framework has been a struggle here. And I think there's been some acknowledgement that having an ATO doesn't necessarily buy you better security. As you go through that process, which I assume is still going to be part of the routine here, is it different? Is an authorizing official looking at different security controls, for example? Are people doing the system design thinking about security controls differently because Zero Trust mitigates some of them? What changes for RMF?
So I'll lead off on this one by saying it does change it. RMF as a framework has always had, step 6 has always been continuous monitoring. And what Zero Trust does is help you actually do that. We've been challenged across the department in achieving that step in the process for a long time, because the technology and our approaches really weren't giving us the ability to do that for real. Now we actually can. In the places where we have these kinds of capabilities, we can see on a continuous basis the state of all of these components of our solutions and assess them against those controls. So I don't know that the controls themselves will change a heck of a lot, because from a functional perspective, they're the right things to ask, right? Are you really secure in this way? Do you have, effective ways to manage access and authorization and all that stuff? The questions asked by the framework are not bad questions. The manner in which we answered them in the past has been very difficult. I think what this is going to do is actually give authorizing officials more information to make better decisions within the framework as it is today. So it's going to shift from, and I think you've seen this from Don CIO in the Cyber Ready Initiative, from a compliance mindset to a readiness mindset, right? It's not just once and done, check the box. It's a continuous evaluation of your readiness from a cybersecurity perspective. I think I'll let Nick weigh in on this from his perspective, but we know more now, and we can show the authorizing officials more now than we ever have been able to in the past with this kind of environment, and it allows them to make better overall risk decisions. So, Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, and that's important when we talk about risk decisions. So from an RMF standpoint, the 3-year ATO cycle, everyone recognizes it, doesn't accurately capture the risk. And so to Mr. Tanner's point, when we talk about that, our suite of tools allow us a fidelity within the entire network, all of the pieces that are attached to it, with the ability to understand, interface changes and, CVEs that are released into the environment, and then even like a Patch Tuesday cycle from a Microsoft. We're able to see those changes instantaneously. So when we talk about risk, it's not something that is a snapshot in time saying, oh, here's my risk. This is my RMF paperwork. Here's my ATO. Versus the risk, from a cyber standpoint, is continuous. And so unless you adopt that approach, the data now allows you to have that fidelity. And now we're able to make much more informed risk decisions based off of that. And so now you're looking at not just an understanding of what the network is doing, but it's changing by the second. To include cloud instantiations that spin up and drop as people are coming on and offline. The global fight that is, defensive cyber requires fidelity. But when you have that fidelity, how do you look at risk? And so now we're trying to change the understanding of your risk has always been there. Now we understand it much more effectively about how the attack surface changes. And so I think from an RMF standpoint, the process is still good. I think the challenge is now we have the data to be able to provide that almost instantaneously. And I think that changes how what happens when you're out of compliance? Well, what does compliance really mean? Right. So for us on the defensive standpoint, compliance is step one. And then once you're compliant, that allows me to have a much more, architected defensive strategy than trying to play the cat and mouse game of, hey, did you patch here? Did you patch there? What is the configuration on your network? What version of software are you running? What are all the vulnerabilities? The fact that we can see that and understand that allows me to provide more information to the authorizing official than it have been in the past. And so I think that's where RMF is still valuable as we go forward, but how do we rethink risk in a continuous basis?
So as part of the RMF process, you do have a system level continuous monitoring plan. I believe it's in step 2. And to help programs align and ensure that their solutions are interoperable, the DoD Portfolio Management Office has produced a DoD strategy. They've also produced a reference architecture, and they've also produced a overlay that shows alignment between other cybersecurity controls and target level Zero Trust, and the changes on how we implement those controls under Zero Trust will change. So in some cases, you may have a set of hardware and software that merely needs to be reconfigured to meet the outcomes that we expect for that particular Zero Trust control.
All right. That is a great place to leave it. And unfortunately, we do have to leave it there for time. I really want to thank our guest today for a great discussion on Zero Trust. We've been talking with Commander Nick Goddard, the Director of Operations for Navy Cyber Defense Operations Command, Barry Tanner, the Acting Executive Director and Command Operations Officer in the Navy Program Executive Office for Digital and Enterprise Services, and David Volker, the Department of the Navy CIO's lead for Zero Trust. I'm your moderator, Jared Serbu. You're watching Federal News Network. Now let's send you back to the studio. Stick with us for more on the Cyber Leaders Exchange.